Hello everybody and welcome back to our Professional Development Webinar Series for Parish and Diocesan Ministers. Thanks for joining us today for our panel discussion titled Starting and Sustaining Effective Young Adult Ministries. For those of you who are with us for the first time, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests' Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions, and we encourage questions during our panel discussion. And questions may be sent to the panelists with the GoToWebinar panel, the questions section, which you can see displayed on your screen here. Simply click the send button at the bottom right-hand corner to send your question, and I'll read as many of those as I can during our discussion today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded. However, you won't be able to see our webcam faces during the recording. That's only available for the live participants. But you still will be able to hear and see this for any of those of you who would like to share this with your colleagues after today. So the format for today's discussion, we're going to start out individually talking to each one of our panelists. We have a number of esteemed panelists and experts in the young adult ministry field. We're going to talk to each one of them individually, and then we'll open it up for a larger discussion for all four of the panelists to talk about starting and then sustaining some young adult ministries in parishes and dioceses across the country. So I encourage you, as they're talking, to feel free to ask a question for each one individually, and I may ask them during the larger discussion later on. But as you're listening in, don't hold back on the questions, because we want as many of those come in as possible during the actual discussion later on. So let's get into it right now with Amy McEntee. Amy is the Interim Executive Director of the National Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association, or NCYAMA, which networks, trains, and resources church leaders across the country in the field of young adult ministry. She's also an Assistant Director of the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Amy has ministry experience in areas of faith formation for children, youth, and adults. She's presented locally and nationally, particularly in the areas of young adult ministry and social media in ministry. And she's been a contributing author to both print and electronic publications, including the Young Adult Ministry in a Box, an online resource kit for creating and sustaining vibrant young adult ministry. And she holds a BS in Education and an MA in Theological Studies, both from the University of Dayton. An amateur photographer and an avid reader, Amy can often be found in art museums, bookstores, and coffee shops. And she lives with her husband, Patrick, in Dayton, Ohio. So Amy, if you could just start us off talking a little bit about your experience in young adult ministry and some of your challenges and some of your maybe triumphs in your experience so far.
Right. So my experience in young adult ministry was really my entry into ministry in the church. I started out my professional career teaching in public high school and as a volunteer peer minister, and then as I went into the ministry field working with young adults. And part of my experience was personal in that I was not raised Catholic, and when I came into the church was really looking for an experience of church that related to where I was in my life and what was unique to being a young adult and being in the church. And so that was part of my initial kind of connection to young adult ministry, was really finding my own place of how to navigate through the church experience. And I have interestingly enough, never been directly responsible for young adult ministry in a parish setting, or even here at the diocesan level. I work in the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis. So there's a perspective in that young adult ministry is really in a ministry to young adults. And that's one of the things that through NCYAMA we have really been working with in particular, is helping priests to understand that they are young adult ministers, and deacons who are doing marriage preparation and baptism preparation, that they're also doing young adult ministry. When our DREs, while they might be responsible for children's programs, the way that they interact with young adults is part of young adult ministry. So from the NCYAMA perspective, a lot of the work that we do is the combination of identifying that young adult ministry is both age-specific, but also how are we connecting young adults into the larger life of the church. And we have seen a lot of great growth and interest in this area, particularly related to affinity groups or groups of people who have things in common other than their age is one of the areas that we've seen a lot of success. So there's been some interesting dynamics and the great thing about young adult ministry is people get really creative at times, and they pair together the life experience and the life concerns of young adults with what the church has to offer. So that's been really exciting, is seeing how we can pair these things together. And I would say one of the challenges that we run into, again, and taking that kind of national perspective, we see a lot of, we hear from a lot of young adults, let's put it that way, that are feeling like they're, where a church is asking for young adults, and they say we want young adults to be involved, that they're not really feeling like their church experience is open to the gifts and the talents and the things that are unique about them and the perspective that they bring to ministry. So I would say that's been the biggest challenge, is helping to identify that wanting young adults to be present, they want to be fully present and contributing and offering their gifts, and navigating that and managing how those pieces all come together can be really challenging.
Thanks, Amy. First of all, I love the idea of young adult ministry not being specifically a young adult ministry, quote unquote, but being also an extension of what the DRE does, what the pastor does, what the deacon does in marriage preparation or baptism. I love that idea. And then you mentioned something about affinity groups. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by educating or training affinity groups, or using affinity groups to attract and touch young adults?
Yeah. One of the big challenges that we identify in church ministry altogether, not just with young adults, is people are so busy. And so what we found is that, and I say we, I keep using we collectively because we talk to lots of people who are doing ministry across the country, that rather than trying to tackle the young adulthood as identified by the bishops as being 18 to 39, really looking within that age span and finding those connections of where we can meet people. So having gatherings for young professionals who work in a particular downtown area. So rather than having something where they have to come after work, offering something either before work or during a lunch hour. That their proximity of where they work and that they are young professionals is something similar. Working with parent groups. So if they're roughly people who all are preparing for baptism of their first child together, or all preparing to get married within that same year. So working with that connection, putting them together. And then some of the other areas have been sports interests. So how can we take a recreational sports league and add a faith dimension to it? So really working through those different aspects of how can we connect people in with the other interests and areas of their lives so that they have a larger connection than just that they're of the same age.
Good. Thanks a lot. I'm sure that everybody has some questions for you, and I'm sure I do too, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk at the beginning, and we'll come back to some of these things you brought up. So thanks a lot, Amy, for being here. Next, Colin. Colin Nykaza is the Director of Young Adult Outreach for the Archdiocese of New York. Colin was a seminarian for 7 years and discerned that Jesus and Mary were calling him elsewhere. So he received a BA in Theology from Sacred Heart University and a Master's of Divinity from Mount St. Mary's Seminary. He's also been a national speaker on sexual integrity, theology of the body, and chastity for the last 7 years. And Colin considers his life mission to help the Blessed Virgin Mary's Immaculate Heart triumph as she promised in Fatima. So Colin, thanks so much for being here with us. Can you share a little bit about your experience with young adult ministry in the Archdiocese of New York, and again, some of the challenges and some of the success stories you've had?
Sure. So I've been the Director of Young Adult Outreach here for the Archdiocese for just over 2 years. And, right when I was hired, it was interesting because Cardinal Tolan and the Chancellor told me that they were hoping to expand the program. So right away I was faced with challenges of setting up a budget and hiring other people and building an office. So basically what we've done is, just to give you a quick structure, we have a Region 1, which is like Manhattan and Staten Island, and I do a lot of the hands outreach in those areas. We have a Region 2, which is the upper counties like Sullivan, Ulster, Orange. We have a full-time coordinator reaching out to that area. Then we have a Region 3 coordinator, which is like Bronx, Yonkers, South Shore. So we have a full-time coordinator for that area. We have a full-time Hispanic coordinator. And then we have a full-time person who also is helping all of us coordinators and kind of helping with special projects and those in various areas like that. So with that, we have a twofold type of mission and purpose, I feel like, for the young adult program. One is that we want to help every opportunity for a young adult. We reach out to mostly 21 to 39 because we're blessed to have focus ministries involved at the college campuses. So I kind of focus more on the 21 to 39. And the first main vision we have is to help young adults have a personal encounter with Christ, and so that's anywhere from participating in the sacraments, setting up, having Catholic undergrounds for adoration, the young adult masses at different parishes for the sacraments, confessions before our young adult mass, to the theology on taps, to all that area. So we do a lot of coordinating and helping get those ministries up and running. The second fold mission is to help not only to have a personal encounter with Christ, but to help young adults to have a personal encounter, in a sense, with each other, in realizing that they're not alone in their faith, they're not alone in their morals. Especially in Manhattan, it's very unique. I think it's one of the best cities in the world. But at times, especially if you're new, it's challenging to get to know people. You feel lonely, you feel disconnected. So we do a lot of work on trying to help connect people. So somebody who's new can come on, look up like Catholic New York. We have a CatholicNYC.com website, and they'll email me, and I'll try to get them connected with a young adult group or a parish and whatnot. So, with that, we realize that, especially in Manhattan, the majority of Manhattan is young adult. I think I think the statistics about 75% of Manhattan is young adult in general. So we want to set up every opportunity to help people to get to where they need to go. But also in the Catholic field, there's a lot of volunteer opportunities that we're trying to do now. We're trying to do a lot more prison ministry and hospital ministry and reaching out to the homeless. I mean, there's a lot of homeless in New York City. So that's a lot of my experience of what's been so far. And, it was right when I got hired, I was I was pretty nervous about everything that was being handed over to me because they gave me this big mission, when praying about it, and it's really helped me throughout the whole 2 years so far, is that, I was praying to Our Lady, and she just said, because I was like overwhelmed, setting up budgets and hiring people, I've never done any of this. I was in the seminary for 7 years, and all I really got in prayer was, you love every young adult the best that you can. When you're with them, I will take care of everything else. And she's stayed so true to that. So just being in our positions, it's such a blessing to be able to bring Christ to them and to be a witness for them. And there's a ton of challenges of just meeting everybody's needs, to keeping young adults going to a similar event, and responding to the needs of young adults, because we want to be there for them as much as we can.
Thanks, Colin. I got lots of questions, but I'm going to stick with one that I think jumps out at me. You mentioned the website a little bit, and I think the Catholic NYC website is pretty dynamic, and I think it stands out in my mind. It was very easy to find. Is that something you were involved in creating with the branding, or what was it that kind of brought that about, and how do you use the website and even your social media to connect with young adults?
So the CatholicNYC.com website was actually started about 10 years ago from a guy named Jeff Smith, and he kind of gave it over to the diocese and to the person in this in my position, whoever it was back then. But so basically, right now the CatholicNYC.com, as you can tell, it's actually not the best website right now. We're working on a new website, which will hopefully be out within the next 6 months to a year. But the idea is we want it to be the central hub for everything and anything young adult for the Archdiocese of New York. We have easy get connected. So I have a massive email list of thousands. Once a week I send out a mass email of all the different young adult activity that's happening throughout the whole Archdiocese, from theology on taps to Catholic undergrounds to homeless outreaches to whatever you can think of. So a lot of the groups and organizations kind of email me to get that on the list. Then we have something called the Catholic list. It's like a Craigslist for Catholics. Numerous people have found roommates, jobs, whatever you can think of. So it's an easy access, because we know, especially when you move to New York City, it's challenging to find a roommate that would share the same faith or morals in whatever situation, so we try to make that easier. We're also going to be having a new phone app that's going to be coming out Again, the idea is we just want easy access to, I want them to be able to look up very easily a parish in their neighborhood, to what time's confession, to what times are masses, to I'm looking for a Catholic doctor or psychologist or dentist. We want to have all that type of access, access to all the different ministries that are happening all together. So we're looking at mostly as the central hub. We also have a Catholic NYC Twitter, Instagram, and the Facebook page. We're using it as a good tool to get the information out there and how to get connected.
Good. I have some other questions too, but I want to bring them up later on, especially about email versus social versus web, which we'll hopefully talk about some more of that in just a little minute. But thanks, Colin, so much for being here and sharing your expertise and experience. Now we're going to move on to Jonathan. Jonathan Lewis is the coordinator of Evangelization and Young Adult Initiatives for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. He holds a Master of Theology from the University of Notre Dame's ECHO program, the Faith Formation Leadership Program, and has served in parish and diocesan ministry for 6 years in the Diocese of Wilmington, the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and the Archdiocese of Washington. Jonathan, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you share a little bit about your story and your involvement with young adult ministry and some of the things that you've tried that worked and some of the things that didn't?
Great, thanks, Jared. Happy to be here with so many great folks. So I've been just in the position around a year here in the Archdiocese of Washington. We've got 140 parishes, and in some similarity to Colin and the experience in New York, we have a diversity of regions that are pretty distinct. And so some of the oldest churches in America are in our diocese, as well as some of the most urban churches in America downtown. And so what we've begun to do is sort of help people get in the sort of swimming lanes as we're talking about it. What are all the ministries going on in the Archdiocese, whether it be parish-based, diocesan-based? We're fortunate to have Georgetown and Catholic University among others, and so there are tons of programs and events. There's not a want for Catholic stuff to do in D.C. And in the Archdiocese, but it's helping people to find access to that Colin, like you mentioned, and to help localize it for people's personal experience. And so we run a variety of events in the D.C. area. One's called Christ in the City, which is a monthly holy hour and young adult mass, in addition to 3 six-packs of theology on tap a year with an aim towards evangelization. And so instead of talking about things that are more catechetical, and we're not going to talk about Tres of Lisieux, for example, we're talking about how can I find God? We're talking about this spring a church that's poor and for the poor, and what does that look like in our everyday lives? And trying to move folks towards intentional discipleship. In addition to that, we host a variety of diocesan-wide big events a year and are trying to sort of formalize those where folks can come out from all around the diocese to find that intentional young adult community. We're also developing and have in the last year some regional hubs of young adult ministry in different parts of the diocese and trying to do more intentional leadership development, recognizing that, again, we have no full-time staff in our diocese for young adult ministry except me. There are, of course, wonderful parochial vicars, volunteers, and part-time folks who are working with their parishes to do that, but how can we best leverage the gifts perspective of young adults in particular regions to help build and places of hospitality and welcome within every parish in the Archdiocese. And I was happy, Amy, when you talked about that, I tend to focus on ministry instead of programs or groups, that we don't need a young adult group in every parish, but certainly every parish can better minister to young adults. And similarly, it's about people, it's not about programs. And so hopefully what we're trying to do is really start from the ground up. When I've had folks this year come to me and say, hey, we want to start a young adult group, it's like, all right, let's take a step back. Who are the people you're talking to? And let's begin from the ground up to say, what are the networks and to leverage the relationships that we already have. And so we're sort of working on a one-on-one basis in our parishes to develop a sort of young adult census, recognizing that most people, in my experience, most pastors don't know who the young adults are in their parish. And that if we just begin to sort of in a comprehensive way start by collecting the names and email addresses of people, who's in marriage prep, who's in baptism prep, who's been in RCIA the last 5 years, so who of those folks are still around, who are helping in youth ministry volunteer positions, and continue to sort of look at all the variety of people who touch parish life. That we've got to sort of break the anonymity that exists in our parishes, because the anonymity just runs counter to the gospel message. And that starts with personal relationship and a relationship-based ministry. And so by hopefully developing leaders in different local regions, sort of that affinity groups like you talked about, Amy, we're hoping that we can begin to warm hearts, as Pope Francis said, in all of our parishes.
Jonathan, pick up on something you said there about, I mean, you used the word intentional discipleship, which I think that comes from Sherry Waddell's book, right? And I think I like that idea, and I'm just curious because I know that your office or your role is an extension of also evangelization in general, and I know that Amy's also involved in the Office of Evangelization. I'm sure each one of us could probably point out the connections you're doing to kind of really the evangelization work in the diocese. But just kind of curious, I think I love that approach, focusing on that evangelization before the catechesis. But I'm just kind of curious about the background into thinking. What's the strategy there? Why focus on, say, not having a workshop on St. Therese for young adults, but focusing on evangelization?
Yeah, I think twofold. One is that there are already a lot of opportunities in D.C. for stuff like that. We're fortunate to have a wonderful ministry connected to the Archdiocese called the Catholic Information Center that has a daily chapel, the closest chapel to the White House in D.C., and hosts a variety of events like that, as well as, of course, Georgetown University and Catholic University, which sort of spin out wonderful presentations and other religious faculty and religious houses in especially Northeast D.C. And so there already is a significant number of programs like that. And certainly one of the things I think our parishes do best is provide faith formation opportunities more so than evangelization opportunities. And so with that recognition, where does the need lie most significantly? We see that it lies in evangelization. The other factor being, looking at data longitudinally, like the National Study of Youth and Religion, that the vast majority of young adults aren't living as intentional disciples, and that most aren't in the stage of life where they are committed to the tradition they grew up in, that most are sort of selectively adherent or sort of open. And so that sort of is the sweet spot for evangelization in my mind.
Good. I want to come back to, hopefully we will come back to that idea in this discussion about evangelization and how we can reach out to young adults. And I think for us as a publishing company and many people, I'm sure, how do you actually reach young adults is a big question, right? How do we get in front of them? So hopefully we'll come back to that in just a minute. But I want to hear from Sean first before we get into that discussion. Sean, thanks so much for being here. Sean Allen serves the young adult community through ministry positions in both the diocesan and the parish levels. He works for the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, where he oversees young adult ministry for the diocese, and he works for St. Pius X Catholic Church near South Bend, where he directs young adult ministry there. Sean first became involved with young adult ministry while working as an electrical engineer in San Diego, which fostered a deeper conversion of faith and led to his returning to school to earn his Master of Divinity degree from the University of Notre Dame in order to lead ministry with young adults more effectively. So, Sean, can you tell a little bit about your story and your experience here in the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, but also your experience at the parish level with St. Pius?
Sure. Thanks for having us today, Jared, for this webinar. So I've kind of moved my way up through, I feel like, the entire spectrum of young adult ministry, from starting out of somewhat a weekly catechized young adult and living in San Diego, in a big city where there's plenty of other distractions other than getting involved with your faith or church, and being drawn into my faith through a young adult community that was at the parish that I happened to live just a couple blocks away from, St. Bridget. And so that was my first encounter with young adult ministry, was actually just a community of young adults who were, normal people, but who were also interested in their faith. And through that, I was able to start, I guess, working and correcting the lack of catechesis, the lack of just thinking about living out my faith in my daily life, and drawn more and more in. Eventually became one of the leaders of that young adult community there. Through a change of pastors, we're eventually able to actually encourage the pastor to hire a part-time young adult minister for the parish, because it had grown so much and it was needed, because it was burning out all the young adults who were trying to lead it on top of their day job. And then eventually got involved with Diocesan Young Adult Board to also help strategize at the diocesan level. Through that whole process, this deepening of faith, realizing I needed to learn more. I wanted to go study my faith more, and felt called to the Master of Divinity program at Notre Dame, which also has a ministry aspect to it, realizing that all of us working in ministry, and pretty much all of us in San Diego, none of us had any formal ministry training whatsoever. I felt like just going by the seat of our pants, doing whatever we thought might work, with no no clear leadership much of the time. So I was drawn to go study, and which brought me to South Bend, Indiana, also a wonderful place, not as sunny and warm as San Diego. And through the Master of Divinity program, really felt called to give back to young adult ministry, what it had given me. So set off afterwards looking for where I would work, and I was able to actually start. I was invited to start some new things here in this Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. When I arrived, there really wasn't much of anything for, as far as young adult ministry at parishes. There had been a large focus on campus ministry. Of course, we have 5 Catholic colleges within our diocese, most well known with Notre Dame. We also have 7 secular campuses that we have young adult campus ministry to, and that had been kind of the focus, was the college level, and there really wasn't anything going on for young adults. So I simultaneously was starting a young adult outreach at St. Pius Church and getting things going for the diocese, originally only in the South Bend end of the diocese, and then now also working with the Fort Wayne end. So the struggles here have been just the steps of the infancy of starting anything new. I was not from here, didn't know anybody here, didn't know the lay of the land, didn't really know anything. So it has really been a collaboration with young adults who are here and who knew a lot more than I do about the area and what's going on. Like John, we have plenty of things being done at Notre Dame that are open to the public, speakers, conferences. Our real focus has been young adults looking for community, looking for a home in the church, and that home comes in the form usually of the first step is a young adult community to welcome them. And then through that community, their gifts are invited into the larger church community. So a lot has been focused, very community-oriented. When we look at programming, I tend to look at things through a faith formation lens, where you have the 4 areas of faith formation. So spiritual formation, we have an annual overnight retreat and 2 mini retreats, we call them, just afternoon long, which are more enticing to someone who maybe has never been on a retreat before or is just looking to get their feet wet in the young adult community. We have a holy hour in Fort Wayne. We have many parishes that have holy hours or other things that we advertise at the diocesan level to help let people know about. For intellectual formation, we have Theology on Tap, both in South Bend and Fort Wayne. That is also very evangelical. It doesn't take place in a church. You know, it's a restaurant, bar atmosphere, very welcoming, very open to anybody and their friend who even may not be Catholic. But we really look at do something for their intellectual formation there, as well as turn them back to the local communities to get involved afterwards. They have an experience of community there at Theology on Tap, so we leverage that to help push them back to the parishes to get involved. For service, pastoral formation, in South Bend we have a Catholic worker in town that we steer a lot of people to get involved. A lot of the people who live and work at the Catholic worker are themselves young adults. They run a couple of overnight houses as well as a drop-in center. We're involved in Habitat for Humanity in the summer. We do a young adult build. And then a lot of the parishes, some of the parish activities will tend to center around service, so we'll also advertise those to get people involved. And then there's the whole training piece of encouraging parishes to also reach out to young adults without giving them, feeling like they're being given yet one more thing on their plate that's already overflowing full, and being there to then help them do that through training, whether it be we do annual trainings for young adults and parish staff, as well as go into parish offices to speak with them and to go over the basics and whatever their needs are, find out what their needs are and help them.
Yeah, Sean, I think Sean's being a little bit, I think, humble a little bit, because I remember I've kind of been blessed to just kind of see the young adults program in the, not program, but the young adults ministry in the diocese, and also specifically at St. Pius, where I'm also a member. just come out of nowhere. I mean, we moved into the South Bend area and shopped around for parishes and came to St. Pius, and there wasn't a young adults community there. There were people who were young adults, but there weren't, there was nothing organized. And Sean, you really grew something. We have a very vibrant young adult community at St. Pius and also in the diocese. Can you take us back to the very beginning of that process, and where did you start? What was the first thing you did to really get the ball rolling from the very beginning?
It's kind of funny. People always ask, how do you start like a young adult community, especially at a parish? And the first step is meeting people. Like, a lot of times it's people kind of laugh at that, but often people think the first thing you do is you plan an event, and then cast out this net, advertise in the bulletin, advertise all over to get people to come to the event. But really, I just started meeting people. I'd ask the staff who are young adults that you've noticed around, and I'd just call, set up a coffee get together, or meet them after Mass or in the back of the church, or see somebody who's a Eucharistic minister who's a young adult, see somebody who's in the choir, and just go up and introduce myself and start meeting them. They have friends. So yeah, really start individually, one by one, meeting people, and then help bring them into relationship with each other, introduce them to each other, invite several of them to go out to dinner after Mass, and we all get a chance to get to know each other, and that's really how it starts.
No, I love that answer. I think it's so true, and I love it because I think all of us want kind of the easy solution, right? If I just had the perfect program, the perfect theology on tap, that would blast off my ministry. But yeah, it comes down to the hard work of getting to know a person one by one. So yeah, thank you for that. Sean, I'd like to kind of bring that as a kind of a starting point for the rest of the discussion. Can Colin, Jonathan, and Amy, if you want to chime in a little bit, what would your advice be to somebody who's just starting out in a parish? They want to begin at young adult ministry. Where would you get started? Colin, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Totally on board with Sean. I mean, the big thing is personal relationships, getting to know people, and so it depending. First, know your parish. It's tricky here in New York because a parish in Manhattan is much different than a parish in Sullivan County. So there's going to be different needs. So first, know the parish. I would suggest, let's say it's a priest who wants to maybe get the group going, try to find 3 to 5 young adults who are on board, on fire, and willing to put the time in. If it's a young adult minister or a young adult themselves trying to, definitely meet with the pastor, or with the younger priest of the parish, and just make sure they're on board. And then try to find a 3 to 5 person team, I would suggest, to kind of so at least it starts off small. But Jesus did a lot with 12 people. He converted the world, right? So got the word out. So we can start small. And then things that I found helpful for other young adults in our diocese is to kind of designate a young adult mass. Usually Sunday evenings. Like myself, I like going out the night before and sleeping in early on Sunday morning, so we like having like a young adult mass at 5 or 6 and have a coin that and have some type of maybe social afterwards. You start off there, you get a nice little feel of what's going on in your parish, and then from there you can make Bible studies or other volunteer events, and you kind of build from there.
Amy, what are your thoughts? What's your advice to somebody who's in a parish just starting out? Where do they begin?
Well, one of the questions that I ask when those phone calls come in are, who are you trying to reach? And is it a group that you already know? So one of the groups that we deal with a lot is we get youth ministers who have young adults who have aged out of their youth ministry program that need something more developmentally appropriate than their youth ministry, or just being a volunteer. Not that just is bad, but something that helps contribute to their faith formation. So if you're trying to reach that group, that's going to be different than if you're working with young professionals, or if you're trying to do to fill the gap if you don't have a strong campus ministry program and you're trying to minister to the college age. So who are you trying to reach? Are they people that are already there and around, or is the young adult the noticeable gap in your parish? With NCYAMA, we did some work a couple of years ago where we broke down that the two areas that we see as being big ministry fields. We have some dioceses in this country that have tons of young adults who are engaged in churches and they just don't know what to do with them. They're here, but how do we minister to them specifically? So, for example, we did some work with the Diocese of Brownsville, where the median age is 26, and they are going to Mass, and what do we do? How do we help minister to them? And then the other is like DC or New York or areas in New England where there are tons of young adults that aren't necessarily connected to the church. So figure out who are the young adults that you're trying to reach and where are they naturally gathering. So if they are coming to a particular Mass, or if you don't see them at all, where around town do you see them, to sort of gauge what their interests are. And then again, doing that work of building those relationships. So absolutely agree with that. Get that team who bring a broad perspective of young adult ministry into, what are young adults looking for, and how can we help either supplement what they already have or provide what that gap is. So if they're looking for community, but they have plenty of service opportunities or those kind of things. But to start with those relationships and the places where they are naturally coming together or have a shared interest or need, and moving from there.
I love that you brought that, the way you started that conversation, because I feel like the young adult is such an analogous term that, as you mentioned, I think the bishops define it as 18 till 39. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's not only is a large age range, but within that age range, people have all kinds of different, stages in life and all kinds of different interests in circles of friends and groups. So thank you for pointing that out. Jonathan, what about you? What would you say to somebody who's just starting out in young adult ministry in a parish? What would your advice be to them?
Yeah, certainly echoing what's been said. I mean, a couple thoughts. One is set yourself up for success. I mean, certainly going about what Sean described and what I was describing earlier in terms of building personal relationships, but don't have your first event be something where you have to fill a room of 50. You're just gonna lose that most time. And I think that's what many people's experience is you get a couple passionate young adults, they bust their butts to try to get something to happen. Maybe they're lucky enough to have really strong pastoral support, and it just flops. Because the grassroots aren't there. And so if you do something like a Bible study or invite people to your home for dinner or to the pastor's house for dinner, if 5 people come, that's a really great event. And if 30 people come, wow, overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But if the expectation is set where you have to reach 50 people, that's going to be really tough. And to often help people think in terms of evangelization from the beginning. And so if 3 people gather together and they really like praying the rosary and Taizé chant and adoration, that might be a nice thing for that group to do. But if they're going to build a young adult ministry for people who aren't coming to church regularly off of that, that's going to be really tough for someone who doesn't have that really connected faith experience to walk into a setting like that and to feel comfortable and to feel welcomed and at home. And so to always be mindful of who are the people that we're trying to attract. We have a year-round radio presence and TV commercial presence in the Archdiocese of Washington. And so we always are asking, like, okay, what's our audience? We can't use certain words that seem sort of normal and Catholic to us because the average person listening to talk radio doesn't know what that word means. And so it's been helpful to sort of help us hone our message. And I think we always have to think of who's not there as well. But I just want to throw a pitch out there for a regionally based young adult ministry as sort of one option. I would say if parishes in my diocese were calling, the majority of parishes in my diocese aren't set up right now or built in terms of their capacity to have a parish-based young adult ministry. And I think we can get there, but I think if that's the goal, and certainly the goal is to always help young adults connect to a particular parish community, that a regional parish community or young adult community doesn't necessarily take away from that. And often I think can lead to not having quantitative mass. And so the question, I use the analogy with pastors about like college campus, and when smart colleges always wait to see where students walk before they build sidewalks. Because if you build these beautiful arcing sidewalks and a flower bed is right in the middle, the quickest way to get there, college students are just going to walk right through the bed of flowers, and it's this little dark, piece of grass that's just going to get trampled on, because that's the quickest way. So looking at people's young adults' lives, where do they go? Kind of like Amy said, where are they going to the mall? Where are they going to grab coffee? Where are they going to dinner? And then if there are 2 or 3 parishes within that sort of area, that seems like a really natural space and collaboration to sort of engage in.
And if I could just real quick with Jonathan, two quick points. One, exactly right. Don't get discouraged by low numbers, because you'll see, in the very beginning, it's going to be tough. And I can see a lot of leaders get discouraged if only 4 or 5 people are coming to their event, and it's been 2 months or so. But to keep going, there will be a snowball effect. And lastly, I would just say, just pray. Prayer is so important. I'm telling the coordinators all the time that, like, the fruitfulness of the ministry is not going to be determined on how much work you're doing or where you're based. The fruitfulness of the ministry is going to be depending on how much you pray. We try to consecrate ourselves right away to Our Lady, to the whole program to Our Lady, and then the Blessed the time in the front of the Blessed Sacrament is priceless. I mean, I'm always telling the coordinators, like, part of your job is to do a holy hour if you can. I can't, of course, demand it or any way, but I always encourage them, even if within work hours, do that holy hour, because that's where the fruitfulness is going to come. That's where, the grace and the energy helps.
No, thanks for saying that, Colin. I think it's so easy. I'm sure anyone can attest to this, especially in the roles that you're in. You get so bogged down in the day-to-day and the details that it's very hard to lose track of the purpose and the higher purpose for what you're doing in prayer. You kind of have to double it when you're doing a thing like you're doing. So thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, Amy, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add, Jonathan was talking about the words that we use that seem perfectly normal to us, and young adult is actually one of those words. If you walk into a bookstore, you go to the young adult literature section, it's adolescent literature.
Yeah.
So even using the word young adult ministry, we have to make it clear who are we talking about.
So where do you start then? So where do you reach out? I mean, besides going to the places where they're at. I mean, you meet them at after Mass or at parish events. Where actually are young adults? And it's kind of a larger term, but where are young adults at? You mentioned the mall as an example. What are some really specific examples in your experience? Where do you encounter the most young adults? Sean, let's start with you. I haven't heard from you in a little while.
Sure.
Where did you meet everybody?
Of course, as you know, St. Pius X is a large parish. It's one of the almost the largest parish in our diocese. So I was given a large community in which to draw from immediately, which was helpful. We also have the largest apartment building complex just down the road, and so that in itself was going to lend to there being lots of young adults at St. Pius in the St. Pius area. Basically, I mean, because I was coming in as kind of an outsider of not being, I was new to the area. It was relying a lot on the young adults here who knew other young adults and knew where they were, especially those who grew up here, those who had been here just a little while, and each of them had, their small network of, a couple young adults that they hang out with to really just connect those. So it's really like a very grassroots, very through everyone. So it wasn't me going around individually everywhere finding young adults. If I put my diocesan hat on, I mean, we look around at what are the parishes where there are lots of young adults living in that particular area. We're not an area where, like in New York, where 75% of the people are young adults. So there's definitely some parishes that young adults gravitate to based on where they live. And so we don't really do regional ministry, but we kind of have a regional outreach from a particular parish that happens to have a larger number of young adults there. And young adults are mobile. I mean, they will shop around. They will find if they know something that's going to be worthwhile for them, they will come. So we try to reach out from specific parishes that, again, already leveraging their strength of already having some young adults there, to then reach out to those who are at nearby parishes, but their parish isn't going to probably ever have a young adult outreach.
Amy, you mentioned young professionals a couple of times as an example. Has that been, in your experience, the easiest kind of group to connect with, or have there been other groups that you've been able to have success with, do you think? Or maybe you or other places. Go ahead.
It depends on where you're located. One of the, probably the most frequent phone call that I've been getting for NCYAMA recently has been addressing young adult ministry in rural dioceses, particularly in towns where a lot of their young adults are moving out, or where there's nothing to do there. There's not a mall to go to. So it depends on the setting. Again, in the urban setting, looking at young professionals is sort of an easy way to go, particularly if you can offer something that also gives them a career skill that makes them a more marketable person in terms of outreach. That where are they going to spend their time is also where are they going to invest that. So if you can make a connection to both the need for community, the connection with other professionals, and also offer a career enhancing or a marketable whole skill that goes along with it, we have seen some people seeing success there. Like I said, other groups are those who are looking for fitness. You know, running is a huge phenomenon right now. There are lots of people who are really into running, and so we have seen even regionally or with parishes, just offering a space for a running group and advertising that to young adults, because the gym is a place where they hang out, work. You know, I used to joke that I had my best conversations about God in the laundromat. So there are really some very functional places where you can find young adults. It's not always as glamorous as TV sometimes makes it out to be, that, you know, we're going to the gym and we're grabbing a latte and then we're going to the mall, and, you know, sometimes you're finding more in the less glamorous spaces like preschool drop-off line and you know, employment skills places and those kind of things.
Good. I don't want to be selfish about all the questions that I have, but I have a number of people that are coming in with questions, and I want to turn to them a little bit and offer them to all of you. This is from Brandy. She says there's a lack of full-time focus on young adult ministry at the diocesan level. She doesn't say where she is, but they always want to combine young adult ministry with the youth ministry office or others. So what advice would you have, and this is great for all of you, I think, who have kind of vibrant young adult ministry in the diocesan level. What advice would you have for convincing the diocese of the importance of a more directed and a focused approach on young adults? Jonathan, how about you? What would your advice be? How do you make your case to the diocese?
Oh, I'm not sure you convince the diocese. I think faithfulness and fruitfulness leads to increase in ministry. I think people are smart. At a practical level, one piece of advice that a mentor of mine gave that I think is worthy of more discussion in the field of young adult ministry is the financial question. And the reality is, so many parishes are really struggling to keep lights on, and that is the forefront of every pastor's mind, no matter how big or small the parish is. And I think that while young adults aren't the most financially secure, successful people, there is a significant number of them, and that we've got to figure out how to best leverage that in terms of promoting ministry for that population. Not to take away from what the diocese is doing, but to really help young adults give to the diocese so that there are more resources there. You know, we've got about almost 45% of the population of Washington, D.C. are young adults. And I'll be honest, I don't carry cash around a lot with me. And so if I don't have cash, how am I donating to a parish unless you're using something like Faith Direct or an online giving program? And most of our young adults aren't registered in parishes, and most of our young adults aren't using online donation. And so at a very basic level, I think we can recognize just the enormity of the population. I think it's a really tough question in terms of how to engage the need. But I think that, you know, pastors in the best sense of the term can be jealous of their fellow brothers, and so if you can really invest and show things are successful somewhere and find those who are willing to work with you, to really lean into those and to start with those who are willing to work with you, because otherwise there's just going to be a lot of time wasted. We're very fortunate to have a lot of pastors who are interested in working with us, but I think success in one area will lead to others sort of paying attention and saying, hey, we want that here too. And I think then having people to say, hey, let's help you make that happen.
Colin, you mentioned earlier before we started the call how young adult ministry has just kind of exploded in New York. What was the turning point for you at the diocesan level? Why was there so much support for you in the work that you're doing with young adults? Can you give a little background how much things have grown and why?
Sure. So basically what happened was, at the very beginning, there was a guy who moved in from Chicago, this about 8-10 years ago, and he started having these rooftop parties in New York City. And he gathered the emails. So he ended up gathering about 1,000 emails of Catholic young adults. And then he went out and he found a donor who would be willing to pay a full-time salary for an individual, and then he approached the diocese with that. So again, you know, as Jonathan was pointing out, that like I'm sure most bishops and pastors they would love to be able to put resources and time and money into the young adult program, but you know, it's practically speaking, this day and age, it's very difficult for a lot of dioceses to do that. So that's how we got started, and it worked. He approached the Family Life Office, and they approached the Cardinal at the time, and they said yes, as long as there was already a set plan of like all these people are involved, these ministries are happening, and there's a donor that's going to be helping out pay. Now, as time went on, that was about 8 years ago, everything just started to explode. So like we started having the monthly young adult mass once a month at St. Patrick's Cathedral, you know, and so that's grown from 50 people to 300 to 400 average a month. And then all of a sudden Cardinal Dolan is also doing some of those young adult masses, and we had about 1,300 plus show up for that in December. So like, because things are growing, we needed to start somewhere. So that's recognizing that things are growing, recognizing that they finally, and again, New York is very unique in the sense that the highest, I think anywhere in the country we have the highest average age of people getting married, which is later in 20s and early 30s, which is not the case everywhere in America. So like, we have that issue that we're dealing with. So there may be a greater need in that sense for our diocese. But so that's basically what's happening with us.
Sean, how about you? What tipped the hat from kind of a campus ministry mentality to a young adult mentality in the Diocese of South Bend or Fort Wayne South Bend?
Sure. I'll say this. That switch started before I was actually here. It just hadn't been fruitful yet, and part of that was the people who were doing young adult ministry were wearing both hats of campus ministry and young adult ministry, which is the other common combination you'll find. If it's not young adult ministry and youth ministry, it's young adult ministry and campus ministry. And I think there was a clear vision for campus ministry of, all right, you're given this location, here's, you have access to the people, and it's a much more clearly defined ministry than young adult ministry. And so there just hadn't been much success with young adult ministry. So that wasn't really like a tipping point of a change, but it's definitely was somewhat what Jonathan was alluding to, is once people see something actually working, other people will want to have that. And so that has been what has caused things to grow. It wasn't really that there was like convincing anyone that to want something that they didn't want. It was showing, I guess, what could be, and I think there was then also a lot of misunderstandings of what young adult ministry was. People thinking that in order to have young adult ministry, you have to launch this big program, like, for youth ministry you have Life Teen or Y Disciple, or, it's going to be this huge thing with this big launch, and to really, it's the first point is educating people on first, like, who are young adults, and then next is what is young adult ministry. It's this grassroots thing that it is better if it starts small so that you can build relationships. You're not trying to welcome 50 people who don't know each other or anybody else all at the same time with 2 people at a hospitality table. So kind of it was a reorientation also of people's view of young adult ministry, but that could only be done through them seeing it and coming into encounter with it. So it was definitely a lot of inviting pastors to come, celebrate Mass with the young adult community at a retreat, just so that they are exposed to the young adult community to see what it is. I will add just one other quick thing. When I was in San Diego, it was a combined youth and young adult ministry office, and I found there and other places where children's ministry and adult ministry are combined, adult ministry tends to get the short end of the stick, of a lot less of the attention than the children's ministry. And so we did, as part of, I was on a young adult board, we lobbied to the bishop to have that position split out so that the person doing young adult ministry was not the same person overseeing youth ministry. Not anything personal to them, but just to do justice to the position. And so they didn't go and move it to a full-time position, but they did hire someone half-time who was also half-time employed at a parish, similar to my position is here. So that was also kind of showing a roadmap to doing something different that, you just have to lay that out, and if the bishop is or other staff are open to it, they might be, but there's no convincing someone of something that they don't want or don't think is necessary.
We have a great question coming in based on this discussion from Whitney. She says she's a single volunteer minister in the Diocese of Dallas, Texas, with a full-time job. So she asked, and some of you brought this up about recruiting teams, right? How do I go about attracting that team of 3 to 5 people to help out without scaring people away? There's a lot to be done. I think young adults are already overwhelmed and with lots to do. Amy, you mentioned this earlier before. Can you expand on it a little bit? What would your advice be to someone who is trying to recruit a team of young adults to help out with some of the large amount of work that needs to be done?
I think part of the key to recruiting them is pairing with things that they are either naturally inclined to or that they are good at. So using those gifts so that it's not as much work, but a more an easier investment of time, and then being realistic about the amount of time that it will take. So starting with smaller projects, so for example, rather than, Jonathan said, don't set it up where your first event is 50 people in the room, but starting with something smaller that is a little more intimate. So it might be that you start by inviting 3 people to go out for dinner or for brunch or for coffee after Mass, and getting to know them and their interests and what are their hopes for a ministry, so that you kind of naturally create this common vision that gives people energy, so that it's not sucking the life out of them, but that it's giving them energy to move forward in that ministry. And again, being honest and realistic about how much can we manage in this time and with the people that we have, and then looking for who are people who have gifts that are outside of our ability. So who can we partner with in order to help build that team? But I really think that starting with getting to know them and what are their contributions, so that it's a life-giving process, and that they're valued, and that you care about who they are and how they will grow through this process, and not just what they can get done for you, is a good place to start.
Colin, how about you? What would you say to someone who is looking to get volunteers involved, or maybe how have you gotten volunteers involved
Sure.
with young adult ministry?
It's a really good question. I would, depending on your parish, backing off Amy, so let's say one person is trying to start this. Recognize that God could be giving you this mission. So when you're given this mission, you have all these ideas and structures of how to do it. You don't have to necessarily unload that on the first time you meet someone, because that's the mission you've been given to kind of. So I would recommend practically maybe ask the pastor if you can get up at the end of Mass for just 1 minute, just being like, hey guys, my name is so-and-so, and I'm interested in starting a young adult group for 20s and 30s. If there's anybody interested in becoming part of that, please see me after Mass. And from there you can maybe 3 or 4 at each, because go to every Mass, because you'll be shocked at how many people you don't know in your parish. Mm-hmm. And from talking with them in the back, maybe get their information, and the next step I would say is take them out for coffee and just see how engaged they are. And then, as Amy was saying, then you get to know them a little bit and empower them. Young adults, I've noticed, they love to be empowered. They like the fact that you work, for example, for the fact that I work for an archdiocese. So when I approach someone and ask them to do something, they look at that as Cardinal Dolan or the Chancellor, going to them in a sense, and so they like to be empowered. They want to get involved somehow. So practically, that'd be one way to kind of go about doing it. And then from there, it's kind of like a snowball effect. The more people you meet, the more ideas you get together, things just start to happen.
Yeah, and if it's possible, really encouraging the pastors to sometimes do those asks, and to sort of to have the pastor to tap people on the shoulder and to have that personal invitation whenever that's possible.
Yeah. A great question from Megan. I'm sorry, Sean, if I'm cutting you off. There's a great question from Megan that I want to get to before we finish up. He says, basically the background, I think young adults we know are very mobile more than any other generation. They're in a certain place for a couple of years and move someplace else. They're parish shopping, and we brought that up a couple times, and some people have brought that up in the questions. So I think Megan's question addresses this very well. She says, how do you sustain a young adult ministry at the parish level? It seems to have ebb and flows of young people coming through. Should we just accept that and just continue to reinvent the ministry as things change, or what would your advice be to Megan and other people in that similar situation of the constant flow of different people coming in? Sean, how about you? Looks like Sean's frozen a little bit. Sean, are you there?
I think. Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, go ahead.
So I guess one of the things with young adult ministry is people, again, have this vision of what it should be, and maybe they're comparing it to somewhere else that they've either experienced good ministry or seen it. But really, the first thing is, with it being relational, is you work with the people that you have, and it is embodied by the people that you have. So those are the people, and their interests are the things that are going to be successful. Trying to do something that you saw some other group do or maybe some people that used to be in your community that they really like something and led something and they leave and try to just plug other people into their spots, but they're not really interested in it, is not going to work. So you are really working with the people you have, and so it will change over time. And so you have to be okay with not having it be some specific way, as that's the right way to do young adult ministry, and that's what we're the activities that we're supposed to be doing. So you do have to be flexible due to the mobility. But then the other thing is you have to always have an evangelical outreaching to more people, because if it becomes a clique, over time people are going to move away or get married or other psychological mobility, change jobs, whatever, and not be able to participate, and you will just constantly dwindle over time at a pretty steady rate. So you have to have an inflow of reaching out to new people for it to work.
I love the way what you said about young adult ministry doesn't have to be theology on tap. It might be theology on tap this year, but next year it might be something else. It's scary in some ways, but also just the truth. That's the way things are. I'm sorry. Who was jumping
I was
in?
going to just back off Sean and say he's absolutely right. Avoid the clicky. So if you have let's say you have a 3 to 5 team, it's we all we all have our natural likes and dislikes. I tell my coordinators all the time, you don't have to like everybody, but you do have to love everybody. You open it up to everybody, and to avoid, at least to the central team, to avoid clickiness, and naturally we do that. Even when I'm at an event, I have certain people or friends that I would like to go over to and talk to, but I make a distinct effort to almost in the matter of ministry, avoiding that situation and going out to that person who's here new for the first time. So it's really important for at least the initial team to be out there, reaching out to everybody and avoiding the clickiness, as Sean was saying.
And I would just add to that using the buddy system, so that there's not one person who holds the whole vision or all of the logistics, or that there's at least a couple of people who know what the processes are, so that if something happens, particularly in the middle of planning, that there's someone there who can pick up the pieces. And it's related to that empowering. We have a young adult group ministry here in the Archdiocese that they have a core team who sets their basic calendar, and then when young adults come in and say, hey, I would really love to do this, they say, we'll add it to the calendar, you have to plan it. And then they support that person, but it gives them that experience of planning and understanding the logistics, even though they're not formally in that leadership role within that particular ministry, so that when someone else goes off of the leadership board, someone else has had experience and knows that they can be successful, and that they're willing to step into that gap.
Yeah, at a logistical level, we're fortunate to have a lot of Type A personalities here in Washington, but there's always a lot of transition as a result of just life here, and institutional memory is essential. And so how do we help young adult communities to really be professional in the best sense in terms of writing down some basic expectations, job descriptions, having a plan of transition when core leaders are moving on, and keeping files like that so that we can look back and see, oh, they did the same thing we're trying to do all over again 16 months ago, and just none of us were here 16 months ago, so we didn't know it.
It's funny. It doesn't sound very much. It's not very much unlike youth ministry or campus ministry in that sense, right? I mean, it's constantly people are going through, and it's just kind of the way things work. We're running out of time. I can't believe how fast the discussion went. And there's so many questions that people have asked. I have so many questions that I wanted to get to, and I apologize for going over here. But I want to just let each one of you say kind of where people can find you and find out more about the good work you're doing, and also maybe just give one parting piece of advice that you give to people who are in the trenches wanting to start and sustain young adult ministry. We'll work backwards the way we introduced you. Sean, go ahead and go. Where can we find out more about what you've been doing, and also what's your parting piece of advice?
Sure. You can go to the Diocesan website. It's www.diocesefwsb for Fort Wayne South Bend.org. Then /YAM for Young Adult Ministry, and find out the great stuff here, as well as links to all the local communities at parishes or other organizations for young adults around town. And St. Pius is stpius.net, and /YA for young adults, and you can find out what's going on there. I guess my parting advice is usually when I meet with young adults or staff who are looking at starting young adult ministry, the first thing I do is actually give them permission to go at whatever pace it goes, so that, again, they're not looking at, I work full time, how am I going to have enough time to do this, or, I'm the DRE, but the pastor asked me to add on, starting a young adult group. So it's just like go at the pace that you can go, and don't put the expectation on yourself to be more than what you can do.
Thanks, Sean. Jonathan Lewis.
Yeah, the Young Adult Ministry in the Archdiocese of Washington is dccatholic.org. DC Catholic. You can also find us facebook.com/dccatholic and twitter.com/dccatholic. My sort of closing comment is just thank you for caring about young adult ministry. As being a young adult myself and working in the field, it's just really inspiring and encouraging to have so many folks on a webinar and to talk with Sean, Colin, Amy, and Jared here today. And just to, like Colin said earlier, just to be prayerful and to really pray for those young adults who are not currently involved in our parishes. And I think that sort of aligns our heart to be open to encountering those folks.
Colin?
Sure. So the website that we have is CatholicNYC.com, so CatholicNYC.com. You can also look at the Archdiocese of New York website and go under Young Adult. We have a click button there. And we also have the Catholic NYC Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And just to email me personally, it's just my name, Colin.Nykaza @archny.org. And again, with Jonathan, I just say be very prayerful. I would encourage anyone to consecrate the mission or whatever to the Immaculate Heart of Our Lady or to Our Lady herself, and to just love the individual in front of you. I tell the coordinators all the time, be interested, not interesting. Just be interested in their lives, in their likes, what's going on, because it goes a long way. Because a lot of young adults are just, I think all of us can relate. We suffer through either an ache of singlehood or an ache of whatever, and they just want to be heard and cared for. And we, as ministers, as young adult ministry, we have a unique opportunity to hear people and help them where they're at.
I love that quote. Thanks, Colin. Amy?
Organizationally, we are NCYAMA, that's NCYAMA.org. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and my email is amy, A-M-Y, @NCYAMA.org. And I'd just like to remind people that Jesus himself was a young adult, and that we have great hope because our hope is in Christ and the mission of the church.
Good. Thank you all very much.
Stealing that, Amy. That's great.
That is awesome. Thanks so much for all of you for being here. I'm sure we wish we had more time, and I have lots of people also saying the same thing, asking for part 2, so maybe we'll see. We just want to close up here real quickly and say thank you to our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Check out their websites in their organizations, as well as NCYAMA, for some more information. Feel free to connect with us on the various social media sites, Ave Maria Press on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Vimeo, where this video will be recorded, or this recording will be posted. The recording will also be posted at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. And you can check out all the recordings of all the webinars dating back to 2010 there on that page. Finally, mark your calendars for our next webinar on Tuesday, March 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Monsignor Charles Murphy will share insights from his new book, Reclaiming Francis. Monsignor Murphy will share lessons that we can learn about the new evangelization from both Pope Francis and St. Francis. So we'll see you here in a couple weeks again. And thanks so much again, everybody, for being with us for this panel discussion about young adult ministry. All right. God bless everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.